Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The dinner was my father's idea. That was the first thing I noticed when my mother called to tell me about it. Not welcome home, Priya, not we missed you, but your father is organizing a dinner. He's inviting the Metas and the Sharmas and the golf crowd. He wants to show everyone you're back. Show everyone. Not celebrate. I had been in San Francisco for 4 years. I came home to Naperville, Illinois on a Tuesday in October, with 2 suitcases and a carry-on and a secret so large it had started to feel like a separate person living inside my chest. I had told no one. Not my mother, not my college roommate Divya who still called every Sunday, not my mentor James who had been with me since the beginning and would have told me I was making a mistake by going home at all. I came home because my grandmother was turning 80, and because I had not hugged her in 4 years. And because some things are more important than strategy. I did not come home to be put on display at my father's dinner party. But I went. As I always went. Because saying no to my father had always cost more than saying yes. My name is Priya Nair. I am 33 years old. I grew up in a house that smelled like cardamom and ambition. My father Suresh's ambition specifically, which filled every room like a weather system you learned to navigate before you learned to read. My father is not a cruel man. I want to be clear about that because the easy version of this story makes him a villain and he isn't. He is a man who grew up poor in Chennai, who earned an engineering degree through sheer will, who built a comfortable life in the American Midwest through decades of disciplined, cautious work, and who believed, genuinely, completely, with the faith of someone who had seen the alternative, that safety was the highest form of love. He had a framework for success and it was specific. Engineering or medicine, a stable company, a pension if possible, a house paid off by 55. That was the map. That was love made concrete. I had, from approximately age 14, been coloring outside that map. Not rebelliously. That's the part people miss. I wasn't defiant. I was just interested in different things, in how people moved through digital spaces, in why some products felt inevitable and others felt forced, in the gap between what people said they wanted and what they actually reached for. I studied computer science at UIUC because it was on the map, close enough. I worked 2 years at a consulting firm in Chicago because it was on the map, adjacent enough. And then I left for San Francisco because the thing I was building couldn't be built in a consulting firm in Chicago. And that was the first time my father looked at me like I had made a choice he couldn't defend to anyone. "What will you tell people?" he asked. "Not are you sure? Not what's your plan. What will you tell people?" I told him, "I'll tell them I'm building something." He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was converting disappointment into patience. "Something," he said. "That's not an answer, Priya." He wasn't wrong. At the time, something was all I had. The something was called Folia. It started as an obsession I couldn't explain to anyone who didn't live inside it. I had noticed during my consulting years that the small business owners I worked with, restaurants, boutique retailers, independent service providers, were drowning not from lack of customers, but from the gap between their physical operations and their digital presence. They had Instagram accounts they couldn't keep up with, booking systems that didn't talk to their inventory, customer data scattered across 3 platforms that never synchronized. The tools existed. The integration didn't. Folia was the integration layer. A single operating system for small businesses that sat underneath every customer-facing tool they already used and made them talk to each other. Not flashy. Not consumer-facing. Invisible infrastructure, which is the hardest thing to explain to someone at a dinner party and the most valuable thing to a business owner who has just realized they've been losing 30% of their repeat customers to a calendar sync error. I incorporated in San Francisco in January of my first year there. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the outer Sunset with my college friend Rohan, who was 3 years into a PhD in machine learning at Stanford and who became Folia's first technical co-founder over a series of Sunday dinners where we argued about architecture until midnight and then stress ate banh mi from the place on Irving Street. The first year was the year I do not talk about at panels because panels want the clean version and the first year was not clean. We burned through my savings by March. We got rejected by 11 seed funds. We rebuilt the core product twice after early user feedback told us we had solved the wrong problem first. I did not tell my parents any of this. When my mother called on Sundays, I said things were moving forward. When my father asked if I had considered coming back and joining a firm, I said I was seeing this through. These were not lies exactly. They were edited truths delivered by someone who did not have the energy to also manage her father's anxiety on top of her own. The first real check, $800,000 in seed funding from a small firm in Palo Alto called Groundwork Capital, came 18 months in on a Thursday afternoon, and I sat in my car outside their office for 20 minutes before I drove anywhere, just breathing. Rohan and I went back to the banh mi place. We didn't say much. We ordered the same thing we always ordered. Rohan said, "Okay. Now it's real." I said, "It was always real." He said, "You know what I mean." I did. That was the moment the secret began. Not because I planned it, but because I called my mother that Sunday and she asked how things were going and I said better and she said good. Your father will be relieved, and something in me quietly, firmly decided, not yet. Not until it's undeniable. Not until there's nothing left to argue about. That decision would hold for 2.5 more years. The growth happened in stages that felt invisible from inside them and probably looked vertical from outside. We closed our Series A, $12 million, 14 months after seed. Series B, $47 million, followed 11 months after that, led by Meridian Ventures, whose managing partner Elena Vasquez would later describe Folia in an interview as the company that makes every other small business tool work the way it was supposed to. We had 340 employees by the time I flew home for my grandmother's birthday. We were operating in 11 countries. Our annualized revenue had crossed $90 million in Q2. I knew what was coming with the TechCrunch piece. Our PR team had been coordinating with them for 6 weeks. The story was scheduled to publish Thursday morning, 2 days after I landed in Naperville. The timing was not something I had engineered for drama. I had simply not told anyone I was coming home until the week before, and I could not very well ask TechCrunch to push a major feature because my father was throwing a dinner party. James, my mentor and now Folia's board advisor, had called me from his office in Austin the day I flew out. "You know what's going to happen," he said. "A dinner. Priya. I know what's going to happen. You could just tell them before." I thought about that for a moment. About my father's face. About the specific quality of his silence when he was revising an opinion he had held for a long time. About my grandmother sitting at the head of whatever table my mother had arranged, turning 80 years old with her full, fierce attention, and how much I wanted to just be her granddaughter for one unencumbered evening before everything shifted. "I want one normal dinner," I said. "Just one." James was quiet. Then, "Okay. Call me after." The welcome home dinner was held on a Wednesday evening, the kind of October night in Illinois that reminds you winter is not a rumor. My mother had cooked for 2 days, dal makhni, lamb biryani, 3 kinds of chutney, a dessert situation involving gulab jamun that I suspected was partially for my benefit and partially because my mother expressed love through volume. The Mehtas arrived first. Dr. Vikram Mehta, my father's oldest friend in America, and his wife Sunita, who had known me since I was 7 and still called me Beta with a warmth that made me feel 11 years old in the best possible way. Then the Sharmas. Then Pradeep Uncle, my father's golf partner, with his wife Leela. Then my sister Anjali, who had driven in from Evanston, arriving exactly 12 minutes late in the way she always arrived, exactly 12 minutes late, as if tardiness were a form of signature. My grandmother sat in the good chair by the window, small and unhurried and alert in the way of people who have decided that the world is endlessly interesting. I sat with her first before the room filled. She held my hand and looked at me the way she always looked at me, like she was reading something just below the surface of my face, and said in Tamil, "You look like someone carrying something heavy and not minding it." "I don't mind it," I said. She nodded, satisfied, and released my hand. The dinner was warm and loud and full of the particular energy of people who see each other 4 times a year and are slightly performing for each other while also genuinely enjoying themselves. I ate. I asked questions. I deflected the ones about San Francisco with the practiced ease of someone who has been deflecting for 4 years. It was during the second round of dessert that my father did it. I don't think he meant it as a blow. That's the thing about my father's cruelty. It has always been incidental, a byproduct of his certainty, not a weapon he reaches for deliberately. He was talking to Pradeep Uncle about his nephew who had just been promoted at Deloitte, and the conversation had drifted toward the subject of young people and career choices and the general state of ambition in the current generation, and my father, with the tone of a man stating a fact, not throwing a punch, turned slightly toward the table and said, "Priya of course went the other direction." She's been building an app in San Francisco. For years. He smiled. Not unkindly. We keep telling her, that app will never pay your rent. Pradeep uncle laughed, the soft commiserating laugh of someone agreeing with the room's consensus. Vikram Mehta looked at his plate. My mother looked at me with the expression she always used when she was simultaneously agreeing and apologizing. And Anjali, my sister Anjali, who was 36 and had an MBA and a very stable position at a consulting firm and had been having a very good year and did not need to add anything but added it anyway, said, "We've been saying it for years." The table moved on. That was the thing. They said it and moved on because to them it was not a moment. It was a known fact, a conversational filler, something everyone at that table had already agreed on before I walked in. I checked my watch. Smiled quietly. Took a piece of gulab jamun. My grandmother, from her chair by the window, was watching me with that reading expression. She did not say anything. He just watched. 12 minutes later, Pradeep uncle's phone buzzed. He glanced at it with the automatic reflex of someone who always glances at buzzing phones, and his expression shifted in a way that made his wife look at him, and that made the person next to his wife look at him, and within 8 seconds the table had noticed that Pradeep uncle was reading something on his phone with an expression that did not match a Wednesday dinner in Naperville. "What is it?" Leela asked. He looked up. Looked at me. Looked back at the phone. Then he read in the voice of someone reading something they don't fully understand but feel the weight of. Breaking, TechCrunch names this year's surprise unicorn. Folia, the small business operating system, confirmed at $1.8 billion valuation following $180 million Series C. Founder and Priya Nair, 33, declined earlier acquisition offers from 2 Fortune 500 companies. He stopped. The table was completely silent. My father had a piece of lamb biryani on his fork halfway to his mouth. He did not complete the motion. My sister Anjali had her wine glass raised. She did not drink from it. Sunita Mehta said very softly, "Priya." I set down my spoon. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at my father, not to perform anything, not to deliver a line, but because he was my father and his face was the one I had been imagining in this moment for 4 years, and I needed to see what was actually there. What was there was not what I expected. There was shock, yes. There was the rapid recalibration you could almost watch happening in real time, the mind reclassifying 4 years of data under a completely different category. But underneath that, and this is the part that has stayed with me, there was something that looked almost like grief. Like a man who had just understood very suddenly what he had been saying. Not what he had meant. What he had actually been saying out loud at dinner tables and golf courses for 4 years. I looked at him and I did not feel triumphant. I felt the strange, specific ache of winning something that cost more than you'd planned. Vikram Mehta was the first to speak at full volume. He was a cardiologist and constitutionally incapable of drama, which was exactly what the room needed. $1.8 billion, he said as if confirming a medical reading. That's the valuation? As of this round, yes, I said. The app. The platform technically. We don't love the word app internally. But yes. Pradeep uncle laughed. A genuine laugh this time, the laugh of a man who has just been surprised by the universe and decided to enjoy it. Priya. Priya. My mother had stood up from her chair without appearing to decide to do so. She was holding her dupatta with both hands, a thing she only did when she was trying to manage an emotion that was larger than the room. She said, "You didn't tell us." "No," I said. "I didn't." "Why?" I thought about the answer I had prepared, the measured, rational explanation about strategy and timing and not wanting to burden them with uncertainty. And then I looked at my mother's face, at the very specific mixture of pride and hurt that was living there simultaneously, and I said the true thing instead. Because I needed to build it without carrying the weight of your fear the whole time. And I needed you to see what it was before you decided what to think about it. The room held that. My father put his fork down. He had not spoken since Pradeep uncle read the notification aloud. He was looking at the tablecloth, at his own hands on the tablecloth, with the expression of someone engaged in a very private conversation with himself. I waited. I had learned over 33 years how to wait for my father. He looked up. His voice was quieter than his normal register. How long? Incorporated 4 years ago. But I'd been working on the concept for 2 years before that. 6 years. He said it without judgment. Just measuring. Yes. He nodded slowly, the nod I knew, the one that meant he was converting something. Updating the map. And you, he stopped. Tried again. The acquisitions they mentioned. You turned them down. Yes. From who? I can't say publicly yet. But yes. Twice. He looked at me for a long time. My grandmother, from her chair by the window, had not moved or spoken through any of this. She was still holding her tea. She was still watching me with that expression that looked like reading. I was wrong, my father said. 3 words. Not a speech. Not a performance of humility. Just the flat, precise statement of a man who had examined the evidence and updated his position. Something in my chest released that I hadn't known was still clenched. I know you believed what you said, I told him. I know it came from wanting me to be safe. That doesn't make it right. No, I said. It doesn't. The dinner did not end the way welcome home dinners usually end. It did not end quickly or neatly. Pradeep uncle called his son, who worked in venture capital in New York, who apparently knew of Folia, and said several things that Pradeep uncle repeated to the table with the delight of a man who has just discovered his friend's daughter is famous in a world he didn't know existed. Vikram Mehta asked careful, intelligent questions about the business model that I answered with genuine pleasure. He was the only person at that table who engaged with the how rather than the how much, and I appreciated him for it. Anjali was quiet for a long time. When people ask me about Anjali's reaction, they want it to be simpler than it was. They want her to be embarrassed, to apologize, to become a minor villain who gets her comeuppance. But Anjali is my sister, and her silence that evening was not the silence of someone ashamed. It was the silence of someone genuinely recalibrating. Someone who had organized her identity, at least partially, around being the successful one, and was now doing the quiet interior work of understanding what her life looked like without that particular arrangement. She helped my mother clear the dessert plates. She came and sat next to me when the room had thinned and said without preamble, I want to hear about it. Not tonight. But I want to hear about it. Hey, I said. I'm proud of you. A beat. That was real. Not a thing I'm saying. I know, I said. As I did know. My sister is many things, but she is not a liar. My grandmother waited until almost everyone had gone home. My mother was in the kitchen with Sunita Mehta, the conversation having shifted to recipes and grandchildren and the comfortable terrain of women who have been friends for 20 years. My father was on the porch with Vikram, doing the thing they did at the end of evenings, standing in the cold and not talking very much. My grandmother beckoned me over. I sat at her feet the way I had sat as a child, cross-legged on the floor, and she put her hand on my head the way she had always put her hand on my head when I was small and the world was too much. The heavy thing, she said in Tamil. Is it lighter now? I considered the question honestly. Some of it isn't. The part that isn't, what is that part? I looked at the window. At the dark backyard beyond it, the oak tree I had climbed at 9 and fallen from at 10 and climbed again at 10 and a half. I think I wanted him to have always known. Not to find out tonight. I stopped. Tried to find the word. I wanted it to not have been necessary to prove. My grandmother was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said finally. That part doesn't get lighter. That part you carry differently. We sat in that for a while. The kitchen sounds, the cold air from the slightly open window, the low murmur of my father and Vikram on the porch. Then she said, You did well. Not I'm proud of you. Not you showed them. Just you did well. The evaluation of someone who had been watching longer than anyone else and had the clearest view. It was the thing I hadn't known I needed to hear until I heard it. I flew back to San Francisco on Friday morning. The TechCrunch piece had, by Thursday afternoon, generated the kind of downstream coverage our PR team had hoped for but not fully expected. Bloomberg picked it up. Forbes ran a sidebar. My phone produced notifications at a rate that made it effectively useless as a phone, and I switched it to Do Not Disturb somewhere over Iowa and stared out the window at the flat. Midwestern geometry below. James texted, One normal dinner? I typed back, Close enough. The Folia board meeting was scheduled for Monday. The Series C close would be formalized by end of month. We had 18 open engineering positions and a product roadmap that would take us through the next 3 years. Assuming markets stayed reasonably cooperative, which they never did, but you planned as if they would. There was work. There was always work. But on that flight somewhere over the Rockies, I let myself feel the full weight of the last 4 years. Not the Triumph version, the documentary clip version, but the real version. The 11 rejections. The Sunday calls to my mother where I edited myself down to moving forward. The Sunday evenings after those calls when I would sit on my apartment floor and let myself feel everything I had tidied away for the conversation. The particular loneliness of building something no one in your family can see yet. The way you learn to live with a permanent gap between what you are and what the people who love you most believe you to be. That gap closes slowly and not all at once. My father and I had dinner, just the two of us, the night before I flew out. He asked questions he had never asked before. What the product actually did, how we made money, what it had been like in the first year. He listened the way engineers listen, with attention to mechanism, asking clarifying questions when he didn't understand something and not pretending he did when he didn't. It was the best conversation we had ever had about my work. And still at one point he said, "I wish you had told me sooner." And I said, "I know. I understand that." And he said, "I would have." He stopped. "I don't know what I would have done. But I would have liked the chance." I looked at him. "I know," I said again. "I'm sorry for that part." That was the truth. I was sorry for that part. Not for the silence that protected me when I needed protecting, not for the years I spent building without managing his fear alongside my own, but for the specific loss on his side, the 4 years of worry that didn't need to be worry, the dinners where he said things he would now have to think about differently, the chance to have been proud of me in real time rather than all at once. There are victories that cost something. This one costs that. I have thought about it many times since. Folia crossed $2 billion in valuation the following February, 14 months after the Series C. We opened an office in London. Rohan became CTO, a title he had been resistant to because he found administrative responsibility tedious and preferred to describe himself as the person who makes sure the hard parts work, which was accurate but not technically a title. Our VP of Growth, a woman named Constance who had joined us from Stripe 18 months earlier and who was the most systematically effective person I had ever worked with, led an expansion into Southeast Asian markets that exceeded our first-year projections by 60%. I gave an interview to the Financial Times in March. The interviewer asked me about the moment the TechCrunch piece went live. I gave the curated version. Gratitude, surprise, the hard work of the team. She pushed gently. What was the personal experience of that night? I thought about my father's face. About the grief underneath the shock. About my grandmother's hand on my head. There are things that feel like winning that don't feel like winning, I said. Not because they're not wins. But because by the time they arrive, you've understood something about what you actually wanted that's more complicated than the win. The interviewer looked at me for a moment. Then wrote it down. My father came to San Francisco in April. His first visit in 4 years. I took him to the Folia office. 19 floors in a building on Market Street, 340 people doing work he could now see and ask questions about. I introduced him to Rohan, who my father immediately began quizzing about machine learning architecture with the focused curiosity of an engineer recognizing a fellow engineer. And they disappeared into a conversation about distributed systems for 40 minutes while I caught up on emails and felt something that was hard to name. Something close to peace. Not arrival. Not completion. Just a smaller gap than before. We had dinner that night at a restaurant in the Mission I liked, with food my father found adventurous and ate with the gameness of someone deciding to have an experience. He tried the tacos. He had an opinion about the horchata. He told me a story about his first year in America that I had never heard, a version I didn't know about being homesick and uncertain about a job he had almost quit in the first 6 months, about the specific fear of having left everything and not knowing yet if it would work. Why didn't you tell me that before? I asked. He thought about it. You didn't ask. You didn't offer. He nodded slowly. No, I didn't. We looked at each other across the table. Two people who had navigated the same inheritance differently and ended up at the same restaurant, which was not nothing. The app, he said. The platform. The platform. A small smile. It pays your rent. It pays considerably more than my rent. Yes. The smile stayed. It does. He paid the check. I let him. Some things you let people do.